Look, if it's an accommodation that doesn't cost much, I don't see a reason not to do it. I mean, if the employee is asking for something that's going to cost a lot of money or cause undue hardship in some other way, then you've got to explore. You've got to do an interactive process with the employee. You got to talk to them. You got to brainstorm about what types of accommodations you can provide to them. But you can't just say, no, we're not doing it. I mean, you can, and then you're going to end up like this company in a lawsuit.
$75,000 later.
Right.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. Well, it's the end of September. Hello, fourth quarter. And returning guest Leiza Dolghih is joining me to discuss a few HR-related news items from the past few weeks. Leiza is the founder and managing partner of the Dolghih Law Group. She is board certified in labor and employment law in Texas and represents both employers and employees. She has been selected to Best Lawyers Under 40 by D Magazine 4 years in a row. Leiza last joined me in episode 50, that was 117 episodes ago, to discuss, of all things, non-competes. And boy, what a year it's been for that topic. In fact, Leiza will be presenting at the HR Southwest conference in October about the current landscape of non-compete agreements. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Leiza.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming back. And before I get started, I got to say, your Facebook is a thirst trap for people who love to travel. I mean, I get grief about how much I travel. You're gone all the time. I mean, you've been, Portugal, Moldova. I know you were in Brussels. It's everywhere. And you went to Asia. Did you go to Asia this year?
I did, yes.
Yeah,
I went to
It's like,
Japan.
okay, I should have become an employment law attorney, clearly. But it's amazing. And you're a great photographer. It's a lot of fun. But then on top of that, you also give amazing book recommendations. Okay, so I am finishing Dark Wire right now. I've read several books you recommended. I'm finishing Dark Wire right now. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. Dark Wire. It's about the FBI setting up a fake phone company basically to catch criminals. It breaks my civil libertarian soul. I think it's a horrible idea, but it's a really good read. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
So we've got some news articles here we talked about. And the first one is the generation everybody likes to kick in the crotch is Generation Z. And so there was a study out by a company called LRN. They're an ethics and compliance firm. They did a survey, and it said that Gen Z employees are almost twice as likely to bend the rules to get the job done as their other counterparts, especially the boomers. So that's kind of nuts, right? They're more likely to actually look at the ethics manual and procedures, but then they're more likely to break those to get the job done, which kind of surprises me about that generation because I thought they were the safety generation and that they were not going to be, they would follow the rules more. But it sounds like they're the exact opposite. We'll get the job done, and they don't care about the formality. But that presents real issues, right, for companies. If you've got ethics manuals and practices, what would you tell an employer to face with that situation?
I think it comes down to training, Mike, and I think that's where a lot of companies fail. So some companies don't have any policies in writing. That's always a problem, right? Because even if you want to reference something, you don't know what document to look at, where to find the rules. And then those companies that do have something in writing, a lot of times, and I've been in that situation myself, you join a new company and you're handed, a pack of documents and you just sign all of them, and you don't really have time to read. And so if there's no follow-up training or explanation of what is it that you are signing, how it's applied within the company, I think just reading it doesn't really convey the importance of the policies to young people. And I actually, you were surprised by the findings. I kind of wasn't.
Well, you're much younger than me, so you're closer to that generation. So,
Yeah, I think actually I wasn't surprised because I think a lot of Gen Zs kind of, were doing a lot of stuff online. And so you're missing that link of where you can tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, what does this mean? How important is this to the company? Can you explain it to me? Or just watching people apply those rules. Because if you're working from home or you're used to the environment where you don't really have anyone that you can just reach out to and ask a question, asking a question on Teams is not the same. You may not want to put that question in writing, So that in-person interaction, I think, has been a missing link. And so I'm not surprised that they read something and maybe think, well, that's not really that important, because they don't have the benefit of training and being able to reach out to someone quickly and having that relationship of trust where they can ask a question about an ethics policy.
So I think one of the big issues is that they're not getting the mentorship. They're working remote, or they're being called in to work in the office, but their bosses are working remote. The more experienced people are working remote and not giving them that direct mentorship. My oldest son's 25. He's an engineer, and he and a number of his peers who are, post-college young professionals were actively looking for jobs where they would be in the office with the adults or with the experienced folks who can mentor them, and they're seeing a need for that. So how I survived my 20s without being homeless is quite amazing, because when I worked in corporate America, I was the biggest mess when I was young, and it was those interactions with more mature, experienced professionals who would kind of pull me aside and say, "Hey, don't be a knucklehead," and that helped. Right.
Right.
And so I can see where a group of young employees who aren't getting that kind of mentorship in those relationships and don't know that, hey, we really mean this when we say, don't steal, rubber bands from the office or whatever the compliance issue is. We really mean that. And I think that's, I think that's a problem, but I can see where it caused a lot of problems for an employer too, though.
Right. Well, we really mean it, and also kind of give them examples and explain it further than what it is on paper. Conflict of interest is one of the ethics policies that's commonly in employee handbooks. And as a 20-year-old, you probably have no idea what that means.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
All right. So, and it's not even formal training. A lot of times it's informal sort of training, and just being next to someone who is dealing with that issue, even if they're not saying, hey, come learn from this, just hearing somebody deal with it, knowing how they've dealt with a particular situation, that can be helpful. But if you're siloed remotely, or you're used to not being able to reach out to someone, you're used to working and just asking questions online, I think that's a big barrier too among the Gen Z population, is that they don't have that ease that you and I have of picking up a phone or coming up to someone and saying, I have a question, can you talk to me about it? They rely more on written communication, which is not conducive to learning more about ethics problems, really.
And another thing that report said, 90% of senior leaders said that they believe that the code of conduct is actually followed. And then you get to middle managers, and only about 81% of those people believe the code of conduct is being followed. And then 69% of the frontline employees say that the code of conduct is being followed. I don't care what any group says except those frontline employees, because they're the ones who are on the front line. They're seeing what's really happening. And I think that's a problem for leaders, because it just shows that disconnect between the C-suite and the front line.
Oh, absolutely. I saw those stats. I thought that was funny too. I agree with you. And yeah, it can be a problem because you have somebody at the top of the company that thinks everyone is following the code of conduct, no one is really following it, or the majority of employees are not. And then you get somebody who is terminated for violating the code of conduct, and they turn around and they sue the company and they say, wait a second, why am I being singled out when no one else in the office is following code of
Exactly.
conduct? For example, if you have a policy that you're not supposed to use curse words at work, but then everyone is using them and the management doesn't know about it. And then somebody gets fired for using those words, and it turns out everyone else is doing it on the floor. So I can see cases like that. You're exposing yourself to a potential risk of a lawsuit where people are saying, why am I being singled out for violating the code when everyone else
Right.
is?
Well, and if the average across this whole survey is 69% of frontline employees say that the code of conduct is followed, that means there's 31% who say it's not. That's the average. So that means there's companies out there that had where the frontline employees, only 40% of them believe it's being followed, and that's a culture issue, right? Because
Oh,
they see people getting away with stuff. And there are a lot of cultures where we have rules, but if you're a superstar, you're the best salesperson, you're the highest producer, or you're that member of middle management who's the CEO's favorite, you can get away with murder. And so it just takes a few examples of that, of people seeing people getting rewarded for breaking the rules, for them to say it doesn't really matter. And then you've got a real problem in your organization.
100%. Yep, absolutely. I see that come up a lot with nepotism,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? So certain people are allowed to hire their relatives or promote their relatives or somebody they're dating, and other people are not. And it fosters a really bad culture, a culture where people feel like they're not treated fairly. And when you're not treated fairly at work, that's what a lot of times leads employees to seek an employment attorney, saying, wait a second, this is unfair. I've got to do something about it. I'm in America and I'm looking, there's got to be something that a lawyer can do. You don't want to create even that thought pattern.
Yeah, but you can't. It does create a cognitive dissonance in the culture when you see people getting rewarded for not following the rules, and then somebody else being held accountable for that. So, but it's interesting, and Gen Z is probably, they're young. I was Gen X, and the fact that I'm not sitting on a couch smoking dope and eating pizza proves that what people say about generations when they're in their 20s is not necessarily the truth. I won't be doing that until at least 6:30 tonight. So, but Gen Z does have that tendency to have that idea that they're not really respectful of institutions like previous generations were. So I could see, where some of that would play in as well. But they're also the quickest to call BS when they see people who say one thing and do another. And I think if they're seeing that in the culture, they're not going to follow the rules. And then in the WTF Were You Thinking news, a company called All Day Medical Care got agreed to pay $75,000 to resolve a disability discrimination suit. And this is a crazy case. This is like, do they not have any HR people in this company? Tell us what happened, but it's just nuts.
Apparently not. Apparently, no one that even heard of such a thing as
Yeah.
HR or employment laws. They hired someone, and the woman, after she got hired, asked them to
On day
install
one.
on day one, right? Asked them to install a software program on her computer to help her because she had vision problems, and they fired her, and apparently told her they were firing her because she didn't disclose a disability when she interviewed with them, which is another level of violation that's just unfathomable. But it happened. That's the reason EEOC picked this case, because they're trying to make an example. I mean, usually, they get thousands and thousands of those claims of discrimination, and a lot of them are outrageous, and EEOC doesn't pick to prosecute them. And this one, they decided to actually go ahead and file the lawsuit themselves because they wanted to make sure that there's an example for other companies of what not to do.
Yeah, this is ADA 101 stuff. It's just kind of it's wild. First day of employment. I need this accommodation, and it's not even a big accommodation. Install some
Right.
software, and then you say that, and then they fire her. So clearly, this clinic had no HR. So, what is the appropriate thing to do? First of all, should you ask applicants during the interview if they need an accommodation?
Absolutely not. The only appropriate question, even if you see a visible disability, let's say someone you're hiring them to carry and lift heavy things and you see they only have one arm, for example, obviously might be a challenge. The only thing that's appropriate to ask is, will you be able to perform the job duties that are described in the job description? And so that is the only thing you can ask. You cannot ask what accommodations you will need. It's a big no-no.
With or without accommodations, if you can, you do it or can't you, right? And so, and then day one, the employee raises her hand and says, "I've got vision problems and I need the software installed." What's the correct response there?
Well, look, if it's an accommodation that doesn't cost much, I don't see a reason not to do it. I mean, if the employee is asking for something that's going to cost a lot of money or cause undue hardship in some other way, then you've got to explore. You've got to do an interactive process with the employee. You got to talk to them. You got to brainstorm about what types of accommodations you can provide to them. But you can't just say, "No, we're not doing it." I mean, you can, and then you're going to end up like this company in the losses.
$75,000 later.
Right.
And I promise that $75,000, they spent that much on attorneys too, getting to this point.
Oh yeah. That doesn't include the attorneys, and attorneys are not cheap. So if you want to spend money on
because
that,
who knows? I don't know. They may have had one of those Gen Z lawyers. I don't know, but
it was still not free. It's still not free. So it's your choice.
But that interactive process, it's possible that this clinic might have gone through if they had gone through the interactive process, they may have found that for some reason, maybe it won't work with our software. Maybe there's something unique about the way, and maybe there's not an accommodation we can make, although I can't imagine, what that would be. There's not a way. But if there was, then they would at least have had the protection of having gone through the process and being able to say that, and documented that we really looked at the alternatives. These were what the costs were. We just couldn't justify it. But they didn't even do that. So they've got no defense in this situation, right?
You're right. Yeah. Just outright saying, "No, we're not going to accommodate you." Again, that boggles my mind.
So they settled that.
They did settle that. No, I think what also and it's not mentioned in this case, but I think what employers need to understand too is that an employee, when they ask for an accommodation or indicate that they have a disability that may require an accommodation, they don't have to use magic words. They don't have to say, "I need accommodation" or "I have a disability." They just have to reveal information that, that goes to training your supervisors to recognize that, hey, when an employee talks about something like this, that, hey, I have a hard time, accessing documents on my computer or reading them because I need larger font or I need, a bigger screen, that is your request for accommodation. But they didn't even get to that point here, right?
Yeah.
They just outright said, "No, we're not going to do this little thing for you." And so ended up paying a lot of money.
Yeah. And it's just nuts. But if all the employers were brilliant, they wouldn't need HR. And so maybe it's a good thing for our industry and for you and for me that exists. But in the EEOC, it's just a good month for them to go after healthcare organizations. There's an adult daycare in Michigan, and it's an adult daycare, and they deal with seniors who have chronic health issues. And so they already understand that people have health issues. And,
Right.
You would think this is a compassionate organization that understands that and has some grace about it. But according to the EEOC's lawsuit, they had a strict policy, apparently in writing. Their return to work policy said immediately after FMLA's expired, if you don't return to work immediately, we're going to consider that a voluntary resignation, regardless of the issues beyond that. And so the EEOC is suing them. So what's wrong with that policy?
Well, a few things. First of all, it's not a voluntary resignation, right? So
Right.
you're basically terminating an employee so that they can't, and you're trying to make it so they can't apply for unemployment leave. So that's that kind of sucks for employees. But secondly, I mean, under the ADA, you can't do that kind of stuff. You cannot automatically just terminate the employee after the FMLA leave expires. You have to consider whether you're going to grant additional leave for an employee as an accommodation for their disability in appropriate circumstances, which in this case existed because an employee just needed a short extension of leave in order to get her special contact lenses. And so for them to say, no, we're not going to give you that short leave, unpaid leave, for you to get this, this thing that you need to accommodate your disability, that was a EEOC clearly considered that to be a violation of the ADA.
Yeah, sorry, that's our policy. Doesn't trump ADA. And I think that's where ADA and FMLA overlap. Sometimes it does confuse employers because, we say, well, you get 12 weeks of FMLA and that's what you get and whatever. But the ADA still exists. And so you still got an accommodation to do there. And the EEOC's claim is that those employees moved on and found other jobs, and the employer still didn't fill that job till later on, months later, fill these two roles for these two employees. So it was an easy accommodation to make because it wasn't critical that those jobs be filled right away. And so I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and just say they're just sticking to their guns because they said this is what our policy is and we want to be fair to everybody, treat everybody the same.
Right. But you cannot do that. So I think that's a very clear lesson that if FMLA leave expires for someone and they're asking for additional extension of unpaid leave, you've got to at least consider it as an accommodation. You may decide, no, it's undue hardship. I really need to fill this position. I can't hold it open. But you got to be able to be prepared to defend that. And so, because an employee is not going to be happy about that. And on the facts of this case, it was really, really just like the first case that we talked about. It really didn't cost much for the company to do it. And that's probably another reason EEOC picked this case to prosecute, is because it's kind of on the scale of ADA violations. It's pretty blatant.
Yeah. It's just obvious. And they, unless, it seems like the EEOC only takes two kinds of cases. Ones that would be serious policy changers if they could get a court decision in a certain way, and it's driven by what the commission, their specific commissioner's axe to grind is, or things that are easy layups. They don't take cases that, generally that are just going to be real challenges. They want their stats like any other government employer, and they want the wins and check. And so if you get sued by the EEOC and it's not a really novel concept, you've done something wrong. You've screwed up.
I agree. But look, you've picked up on two cases that involve vision problems. And I'm actually seeing a trend outside of these two cases of, as the workforce is aging, that's one of the issues. And as more and more people have to, or feel like they have to keep working in their 60s and 70s and sometimes 80s, yes, there are employees out there that are willing and capable of working, when they're 80 or 75. I think those issues are going to become more and more prevalent. I'm already seeing an uptick in those type of situations where it's either FMLA leave or ADA accommodations related to medical issues, or age-related medical issues. And I think if employers don't think about those things, they may end up with challenging situations.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative. Bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 167 and enter the keyword Dolghih. That's DOLGHIH. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Leiza Dolghih. And there was more, bad news for all employers, I guess. There's cold water, at least, on employers. The Fifth Circuit, and there's a lot of reporting about this that conflated two different cases, but the Fifth Circuit signed off on the Department of Labor's ability to set FLSA exemptions based on salary. But it wasn't the current and upcoming raises. It was the one from the Trump administration in 2019, right?
Yeah, but it's a clear-cut decision. They said that the Department of Labor, which I was surprised with that opinion, right? In the wake of all the
after Loper, right? Yeah, Chevron.
yeah,
We threw Chevron out the window, we thought, but
yeah,
the court here said at least at that lower threshold of what was it, $35,500,
hmm
there was probably a direct. They agreed with DOL that there was a direct correlation between whether you were really an executive or professional versus, they didn't say that the upcoming one is legitimate. They were only dealing with the 2019 increase.
which is an interesting question in and of itself, because at what point will that threshold be too high for the
Right.
Department of Labor to decide, right? So, yeah, it's an interesting decision. We'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, this company it was a company out of Austin, RUM Enterprises, and they had 13 Dairy Queens and a Wally's Burger Express, which I've never tried, but next time I'm in Austin, I'm going to go find Wally's Burger Express. But that means they had exempt managers at these fast food places that were making less than $35,500 and they weren't getting paid overtime. This kind of goes, as much as there are things in FLSA that make me crazy. This kind of is an argument for some salary restriction, right? You can call somebody an executive, a professional, but they're working in a Dairy Queen and making $35,000 a year. They probably ought to get overtime, just from a public policy point of view.
I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one to understand, but
Yeah, you have to have that. I mean, I think you have to have that, because otherwise, what? What prevents someone from, on paper, saying that, yeah, you manage 2 employees and here's your title, Vice President of Wally's Burger, Regional Vice President, Austin Regional Vice President of Wally Burger. Here's your $32,000 and no overtime. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a bit much, and it's interesting that this is a for-profit, because most of the conversations I've heard about companies that were really hurt, or organizations that were really hurt by that salary threshold increase, were nonprofits, where they really did have mission-driven people who wanted to serve the organization and execute the mission of the nonprofit. And they just know this comes with really low salary. That's who I was mostly hearing about on the $35,000 test, not really for profit. I hadn't even considered that a place like a Dairy Queen or even a retail store, something like that, would have that kind of issue.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have not heard about nonprofits complaining about it, but if that is the case, I don't know what percentage of employers they comprise.
They're a small percentage.
Right. So I guess you can't have a law that affects everyone equally.
And we're still waiting. There's on the current increase that's supposed to come up. There's already an increase earlier this year, and another one's January 1st. There's still a pending case on that we're waiting to see, and maybe under Loper Bright, maybe a court will say. But what's interesting is this is Fifth Circuit. If you can't get it through the Fifth Circuit and you're pro-employer, you probably don't have a very good argument. But maybe this next number of 55 or whatever that $1,000, whatever that number is, and the next increase, maybe that'll be too much. Maybe the court will say at that much point the DOL has overstepped its bounds.
That's interesting, because then who makes the decision about what's that threshold salary is? Is it the government agency? Because Chevron said that they, don't get to legislate, and even prior to, not Chevron, but the most recent ruling from the Supreme Court is that they don't get to legislate. We have Congress for that. But then if the courts decide that that's too high, then are the courts legislating? So it's we're getting in constitutional issues, I think, here. But I'll be interested in seeing whether the current challenges to it are going to be affected by the Fifth Circuit opinion on this prior threshold. It seems to me like it would be an easy way to handle it is to say we're just going to follow the Fifth Circuit and not look at the amount, but just the fact that the agency has the power to determine what that salary is. And so, and not have this analysis of whether it's too high or too low and leave it to the Department of Labor. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, and who knows? The Dairy Queen guys they could still appeal beyond the Fifth Circuit too, and maybe they strike gold and get in front of the Supremes on this and see what the Supreme Court says. And it's possible that this Supreme Court would agree that it's not explicitly stated in the FLSA that salary is a consideration, and that the agency is using that as a proxy that's not valid. So we'll see. But in the meantime,
giant bomb just exploded and leave the employers wondering, what are we supposed to do?
But for now, employers should probably plan, if you've got someone who's going to be non-exempt January 1st based on salary, plan on either giving them a raise or moving them to hourly. And that's the reality. Somebody's working 45, 50 hours a week. You can always just move them to hourly, adjust what their average overtime is to figure out what their hourly rate is, and pay them the overtime, and they can still take the same amount of money home. I mean, it's if you're being honest, that's what it's the same outcome, and then the employee. But some employees think it's really special to be exempt. I'm on salary. That means I'm special. No, that means that you get to work more for free than regular employees. And so
I know. I think every lawyer at some point calculated the amount of hours they actually work, not bill, but work, because you also work for you put in work that you don't bill for. And then divide your salary, however big it is, by that number, and realize that this does not look good.
Yeah, I'm not doing as well as I thought. But I do seem to remember that you did have a Facebook post of you working on a patio in some exotic location at a really nice, looked like a really nice hotel or Airbnb. And so maybe I'll take the pay cut if I get to do that.
That was one rare occasion. Most of the time I'm right here in my office. I just don't post on Facebook about it because who wants to see a lawyer's office, right?
only when I'm the plaintiff, never when I'm the defendant. So
yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thanks for joining me, Leiza.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to be on your podcast and talk about all the fun employment developments, which there have been plenty this year.
Yeah, it's a great time to be alive if you're an employment law attorney. So,
right.
And I will see you at HR Southwest here in a few weeks. And you can hear Leiza's presentation about non-compete agreements at the HR Southwest Conference on October 13th through the 16th, right here in beautiful Fort Worth, Texas. You can also watch how the sausage is made as I record 2 podcasts live from the conference. And then you can hear me and my friend and previous guest, Jim Zeta, discuss the legal issues surrounding, you guessed it, artificial intelligence during the legal exchange. You can review the entire HR Southwest 2024 agenda at hrsouthwest.com. And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperatives Marketing Coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.